Sustainability. It's something that as artists we all take into consideration. Even the old masters were constantly battling with sustainability in their practice. But just what is sustainability in art? And is it something we are consciously aware of when creating our masterpieces? Over the course of this series, we will be investigating the ways in which art can both be sustainable and highlighting the ways in which it can be unsustainable. Come along as we investigate the murky depths of the art world and discover for ourselves what sustainability means. When you think of sustainability in art, perhaps you conjure up thoughts of the environment, of toxic pigments, of art supplies sourced from unsustainable sources. But there are many ways in which sustainability influences art and artists. The first that we will look at is that of finance. We make art because we love it, or because we feel compelled to do so. We feel like we aren't achieving something unless we're creating something. We can express ourselves in unique ways that no other medium in life allows us to do so. But for many of us, we make art because we feel like we have to, like it's the most important thing in the world that we could do with our time. But very few of us are successful enough to make a living from it. When you think of the world's most beautiful and important artworks, those that evoke the strong emotional responses that we crave from good art, there are few quite as revolutionary and inspiring as that of a group in the 1800s known simply as the Impressionists. This was a group of artists in France that broke away from convention and painted in a way unlike anything the world had seen before. They often painted quickly and outdoors and weren't concerned with capturing the world as reality, but instead capturing the feeling of the world. Using the newly invented flat-tipped brushes to make fast brush strokes, and the recent invention of the mass-produced paint tubes allowed them to take their vibrant colours outdoors, where they made impressions of the world rather than the realistic and romantic scenes which were popular at the time. These paintings sell for tens, if not hundreds of millions of dollars today. It's some of the most expensive art in the world. But these brilliant, talented artists barely made enough money to live by during their lifetimes by selling their art. Constantly in debt and struggling to get by, the letters these impressionists sent to one another highlight the harsh realities of being a revolutionary, unconventional, anti-establishmentarian, avant-garde, and at the time, an outsider artist. Here in this book, which is a compilation of letters the Impressionists sent to one another, I have a letter from Edouard Manet to Theodore Duret, his friend, from 1876, just 1 year after the first Impressionist art show. And it reads, "I went to see Monet yesterday. I found him in a very sorry state, completely broke. He asked me to find someone who would take 10 to 20 of his works and pay 100 francs a piece for them. What about it? Would you be willing to join me and we each give him 500 francs? Of course, we would have to hide from him the fact that we are the actual buyers. I had the thought of applying to a dealer or some art lover, but I foresee the possibility of a refusal. Unfortunately, one has to be a good judge of painting like ourselves in order to make this excellent purchase. However reluctant one may be, and at the same time, render this service to a man of such talent. Do let me know as soon as possible, and let me know when you can meet." Monet struggled to make enough money to live by for most of his career as an artist, surviving on a mixture of selling his art either directly to patrons or to his supportive art dealer friend Paul Durand-Ruel. He also got by on support from his fellow Impressionists and a series of complicated advances on pictures that were not yet delivered to pay off his debts. He sold most artworks during his early career during the 1870s and 1880s, up to 90 artworks a year. However, it wasn't until the 1890s that he became wealthy, due to a shift in the art market, recognizing how special the Impressionists were. Monet was one of the first artists to sell his paintings in a series. Think of the haystacks or the water lilies. This was a bunch of paintings, all with a similar theme, and they became very, very popular. One of Monet's artworks recently sold at an auction for a staggering $110 million. Vincent became a painter in his late 20s and was only active for about 10 years, in which time he only sold a few artworks, certainly not enough to live from. If it weren't for his brother Theo supporting him financially, and then later Theo's wife, who made it her mission to get Vincent's artwork seen by the world after his death, then Vincent wouldn't have been able to sustain his practice as an artist. Some artists have wealthy patrons that will support them. Other artists sell their artworks online or through markets. Some artists rely solely on the financial support of their families, just like lovely Vincent here. But then there's many artists who work jobs in order to fund their art habit. But no matter the case, we all need some way of making our art financially sustainable. But being financially sustainable isn't the only thing we need to consider as artists. Another thing that's often overlooked is time. How long can we spend on one artwork? What's too long to spend on one artwork? How many artworks can we produce in a year? Some of us can and will be prolific in our output as artists. Some people will be like Vincent, who produced 2,100 artworks, of which 900 were oil paintings, and then there were even more drawings, all in the span of 10 years, which works out to be one new artwork every 36 hours. That's incredible. But then there are other artists like Johannes Vermeer, whose art career spanned something like 20 years and only produced around 60 artworks, presumably spending many months on a single picture. There's no perfect amount of time to spend on an artwork, and you should spend as long as you think the artwork needs. When it comes to sustainability in art, something that's rarely mentioned is being culturally sustainable. But what does that mean? How can we be culturally sustainable as artists? The inability to keep up with a changing cultural environment of society. Trends are something artists use in order to get money, to stay relevant, and if you can keep up to date, you can have a lucrative career. Not all artists do this. Not all artists care about following trends, but sometimes sticking to your own style can have a profound and everlasting impact on the world. But in the 1870s, the group that would become known as the Impressionists would defy trends and what was culturally popular at the time, which involved realistic or highly dramatized scenes of battles, ancient gods, portraits of noble figures. And any artist who wanted to make it in the art world at that time exhibited in the very prestigious Paris Salon, an art exhibition put on by the Académie des Beaux-Arts. Claude Monet, Auguste Renoir, Edgar Degas, and Camille Pissarro had become tired of their artworks depicting modern life being rejected by the Salon, and the strict criteria the Salon had for what art could be displayed. So together, they formed their own art society, where strict rules and conventional art ideas wouldn't have a place. They wanted to show new and exciting scenes of modern life in a way that had never been done before. With this movement, the Impressionists were born, and the group became the outsider artists, the avant-garde of their day, and the art world would never be the same. See, they weren't making what was culturally relevant in their society. And it was very difficult for them to convince wealthy Parisians to buy their artworks. Many of the Impressionists barely made enough money to live by, despite now their artworks being worth millions. During the 8 exhibitions from 1874 until 1876, it was culturally unsustainable to be an Impressionist. It was financially unsustainable to be an Impressionist. It took up so much of your time, you couldn't be doing anything else other than Impressionism. The materials you used were damaging to your health. They were bad for the environment. How could an art practice be more unsustainable than that of the Impressionists? Well, that's where my art practice comes in. You see, I have a dream. And in order to achieve that dream, I'm going to need to make an artwork that addresses all of those points that we've covered previously. My dream is to make the most unsustainable artwork imaginable. Now, you may say that there are so many ways something can be unsustainable. How are you going to address them all? Well, good point. I'm not going to address them all, but I am going to address those key and I think most important ways art can be unsustainable that I have outlined previously. They are, of course, taking up loads of my time, wasting loads of money, being financially unsustainable, being bad for my health and the environment, being environmentally unsustainable, being culturally unsustainable, doing things that other people who appreciate art would find offensive, and harming cultural artifacts like these beautiful paintings right here. This is my design. There will be a fire, and above the fire there will be a piece of tofu, represented meow. And behind the tofu, there will be a freezer/air conditioner, represented meow. And you may be getting some sense of what's going on here. The fire will heat up the tofu, and the air conditioner will keep the tofu cold, never allowing it to get either too hot or too cold. And in order to make sure it doesn't get too hot or too cold, I will constantly need to be checking on it, which will waste a lot of my time. The fire itself will be fed by old paintings, which will be painful to people who love art, and especially me, because I will be making those paintings and destroying them. And I love my paintings. So that will be culturally unsustainable. It will also be quite toxic, so it will be environmentally unsustainable. I will have to make sure not to inhale too much of the fire's toxic fumes. I don't know how experienced you are with burning paintings, but they are an incredibly inefficient source of fuel for a fire. So I will need to constantly be adding more paintings to that fire, and I may get through quite a few paintings. And then, of course, the freezer will be blowing its cool rays of frozen air onto this tofu. And the tofu will be infused with not only the coolness from the freezer, but it will also be infused with those toxic fumes coming off the paintings. This will end up costing around $280, not involving my time. If we involve my time, I won't know that until the artwork's finished, because technically this artwork will never finish, but I only have so much time that I can stay awake and tend to a fire and put paintings into it and make the paintings to put into the fire. So it will take place over the course of a weekend, and we'll see how long I can sustain doing the most unsustainable artwork. Of course, to power the freezer/air conditioner, which will be outside, so it will be even more inefficient at cooling because it will just be throwing out its cool rays into the atmosphere. There will of course be a generator burning some unrenewable fuel source, which will be expensive and unsustainable. This artwork will be unsustainable because it will be wasting my time. I'll have to constantly be tending to this fire, fueling it with lovely artworks, which will be destroyed in an instant because they don't burn for very long. So I'll have to constantly be putting more and more paintings into the fire. I'll have to constantly be checking on the tofu and making sure it doesn't get either too warm or too cold, having to keep it at a nice tepid temperature. There is not a single part of this artwork that will be in any way sustainable. And it will be interesting to see how long I can possibly do this for before either needing sleep, a break from those toxic fumes, running out of paintings, running out of fuel, the tofu getting either too hot or too cold, which will ruin the artwork because we can't have that tofu too hot or too cold. It's being infused with those lovely fumes coming off the fire. And it will also, of course, be culturally unsustainable. I would hope that you find this offensive. I don't want you to be okay with me destroying my artworks. Let me show you some of my artworks. Should that be destroyed? Maybe you think it should. I don't think it should. What about this one? Does this painting deserve to be destroyed? I don't think it does. What about this one? Does this painting deserve to go up in flames? No. This painting's done nothing wrong. In fact, I spent quite a long time working on this painting. I spent a long time working on all of my paintings. They take up a lot of my time. They are, in some ways, very unsustainable because of how much time they take up. What about these ones? They're smaller, but they still took up a lot of my time. Should this lovely dancer be destroyed? What about this lovely dancer that I couldn't get the smile quite right with? Does she deserve to be burnt in a fire? I could go through artworks all day, being culturally offensive, telling you that I'm going to destroy them. But I won't do that. I will save you the harm until the actual artwork comes out, and you can feel all of the outrage, the pain, the fury, the sadness, all in one foul swoop. And in all of those ways, I'm sure you will agree, that will be the most unsustainable artwork possible. Thank you.